The scene opens in another world, Orthia, where dragons lurk, hunting for their prey. The dragon shown is not just any dragon. It is the ancient magic dragon, Mikoldra, whose subjugation difficulty is set to legendary. However, this time it is facing something beyond its expectations. With a continuous barrage of mighty fireballs, it is taken down by a man known to all as the greatest sage. This man is the only one on the planet who is the strongest of all mankind. Time lapses and the scene shifts to the palace of the leader of the Magic Guild, the heavenly sage, Cedric. He is furious upon hearing that his subordinates are suggesting the Emperor stop the declaration of war against the demons. The three subordinates kneeling before him are the Magic Guild executives, the three holy sages. In their opinion, they would be too late to do anything once the war starts. Cedric is not one to be shaken by fear, and since he has already planned out a way to win, he is confident in it. Tensions rise with every passing second, as the three holy sages strongly urge Cedric to reconsider his decision, as there is no guarantee of victory. Throughout the discussion, Cedric enjoys his red wine, relieved by the thought of the war being approved by the Majesty. The only reason the holy sages are there is that they know Cedric is the person with the most authority in the country, second only to his Majesty. However, the protagonist is not one to be easily influenced, so he asks them if they are content to sacrifice tens of thousands of their people to the demons, treating them like filthy livestock. The holy sages are unperturbed, as they are fine with selecting old men and children for sacrifice. This time, even Cedric cannot stop himself from yelling at them, expressing his disdain for such a practice. He further asks them why they wield magic if they cannot even protect their citizens. After taking a sip of wine, he introduces himself as the only sage in history to reach the heavenly level and asserts that he is the only one who can save humanity from the demons. The time for talk is over. Now it's time for them to call the guards and use force. The man is not going to sit idly by and let the soldiers do as they please. However, everything is well planned, and Cedric suddenly collapses, losing all his strength. One of the holy sages then reveals that the wine was laced with a weakening poison, as they knew the man alone could single-handedly defeat a few thousand troops. They also knew that the only reason the Emperor was advancing into battle was because of Cedric's strength. The holy sage mocks Cedric, kicking him on the floor, and tells him they are going to eliminate him right there and then. To save his life, Cedric reveals that if he dies, they will be forced to live as livestock. Once again, the holy sage is unconcerned, as being a noble, he could always sacrifice commoners, especially old hags and children, to the demons. Cedric can no longer bear the nonsense and prophecies that one day the demons will fall and be brought to their knees. Aemon then pours more of the weakening potion on Cedric's face, saying that all the nobles, except the royal court, see Cedric as nothing more than a nuisance. The reassurance from the others is enough to make Cedric call them foolish with his last words. Aemon, in the end, decides to land the final blow, and as Cedric feels the limits of his own power, it is revealed that magical power mostly stops developing after the age of 40, making it difficult to develop the soul, the source of magical power. Cedric realizes that if he were reincarnated as a child and had the chance to grow, then defeating monsters like the darkness dragon Mikoldra, the light dragon Samaris, and the evil world tree Effexor would be a simple task. With that thought, he uses his reincarnation magic, a process that took him 20 years to perfect. In his heart, the man curses Aemon and his team, calling his reincarnation journey a mere detour. Later, Cedric opens his eyes in the form of a boy. When he looks at himself in the mirror, he does not recognize his reflection and is surprised to find an already developed body. Just then, he notices some rituals being performed around his bed. Realizing the ritual is for summoning a devil, he understands that this was not a complete accident. Despite the situation, he is pleased that his mission to acquire a young body has been successful. But before he can celebrate further, someone calls him young master and tells him it's time for dinner. Although he is tempted to rush in, the protagonist manages to stop himself and get dressed. Finally, he goes to the dining table where food is served, and as soon as he takes the first bite, he is astonished by the taste. He continuously asks for seconds and thirds. His senses sharpen with every plate, and after a few more, he asks the support staff to thank the chef who prepared the meal. Everything shatters in an instant when he inquires about it, and he is informed that it's unusual for him to express gratitude, but since he is no longer the same person, he replies that there is nothing weird about praising someone who is good at their job. He then realizes that it isn't his taste buds that have improved, but rather the food that is exceptionally well prepared. The butler asks if he will be attending school the next day after being absent for more than 2 weeks without reason. He adds that as the child of the master's young wife, Continued absence might lead to disinheritance. Cedric realizes there are issues within the household, so he agrees to attend school the next day, asking the butler to accompany him. Back in his room, Cedric thinks of recovering the memories of the body he now inhabits, so he uses his sleep magic and memory assistance magic on himself. The first scene he recalls is being bullied at school by a group of students who enjoy his screams for help. The situation worsens when he realizes that he isn't loved by everyone because of who he is, but because of his father's position. The bullies continue to mock him, even calling his mother derogatory names. Despite the pain, he manages to stand up, but it isn't long before one of his classmates kicks him in the stomach. The attack infuriates Alfred, but just then the bully calls his friends over, asking if they'd like to join in. One of them agrees and approaches Alfred, who is sitting, calling him a sad bag and using him to relieve stress. When Alfred tries to get up, his eyes widen as he sees an adult man confronting the bullies. The man is his sensei. Alfred calls out to him for help, but the teacher coldly tells him that they received a message from his father, Algren. The message announces that students will be evaluated based on their marks, and no special treatment will be given at school. Alfred, in despair, tries to explain that the situation isn't related to schoolwork, but the sensei ignores his pleas and leaves, while Alfred was left all alone, screaming for help. That was not worthy of being called a teacher, as he smirked while allowing the bullies to do what they wanted. Alfred was totally confused about why all of that was happening to him, as his teacher was not helping him, and the bullies were calling him a sandbag without any resistance. Out of nowhere, he found one of his familiars looking at him from the window, so he managed to crawl to that individual, asking for help and telling him that the bullies were completely unreasonable and the teachers were not helping him either. He was continuously asking Charles to help him, as he was his best friend. But as it turned out, that filthy child also turned him down, explaining that he had received a message from his father that he was not to continue his role as Alfred's best friend. Charles was smiling while calling that act of freedom for him, and with that clarification, he too left the place. Confused and abandoned, Alfred is left alone with nothing but silence and the cruel laughter of the bullies. The brutality intensifies as every minute he is beaten by different individuals with all their strength. The more he is beaten, the more the bullies enjoy it. All Alfred can do is protect his face, with even the shadows reflecting his suffering. For their final act of sheer cruelty, they demand that he open his mouth so they can humiliate him further. This brutality drives Alfred to madness, and upon returning home, he becomes obsessed with the ritual of summoning a devil. As the task of viewing memories ends, the protagonist resolves to fulfill the young man's wish for revenge, as he was a devil himself in his previous life. The next morning, he arrives at school with the butler, who expresses concern for his mental and physical well-being. This time, Alfred smirks and reassures him before sending him back to the palace. As Alfred walks past, he notices one of the bullies sitting on the stairs. The bully recognizes him and gives him a weird look. Sheep always travel in herds, and soon the main villain of the incident appears, demanding a silver coin in a cold voice. It has been a long wait for their reunion, and another bully joins in, asking for a gold coin. Their sinister intentions are clear, and they begin to discuss robbing Alfred before his father takes control. The protagonist, however, remains cautious, knowing that getting into a fight would be boring. So he decides to walk away, but is stopped by the bald bully, who threatens him just as before. Alfred can no longer tolerate the situation and decides to confront them all by himself. As expected, the bald bully's ego is hurt, and he attempts to land a punch on Alfred's face. But this time, the main villain intervenes, reminding the bully of the last controversy among the teachers. Despite the warning, the bald bully is determined to fight. Meanwhile, the other bully evaluates the surroundings and eventually leads the protagonist to a secluded corner of the school. Once they are alone, the bullies thank him for being so cooperative. Suddenly, the protagonist's voice turns sinister as he raises his hand and tells them that threatening the weak is not elegant at all. It's enough to provoke the bald bully, who jumps at him, but Alfred remains still, as if waiting for the attack. This time, the situation is different. Alfred overpowers the bully with a single move, reversing their positions. The bullies freeze in shock as they realize something is terribly wrong. Before they can make another move, Alfred uses his magic, unleashing an explosion that breaks the bully's neck. The fight ends as quickly as it began, leading the protagonist to coldly smile at his unconscious opponent. The second bully was shivering in his heart when he asked if Alfred had brought any magical item along with him for it. Alfred, being too cold, turned to him, denied that fact, and told him that he had black magic he had honed himself. It was complete nonsense talk for that man. He took the chance to attack him like his bald friend while calling him a loser. As expected, before he could even touch the protagonist, he was punched so hard in the face that he got a red nosebleed. Once again, Alfred felt that he had done quite a bit of damage to a pest, so he began his treatment all by himself. After treating the first, he reversed time to get the wall fixed. However, he knew that his injuries could be cured, but his memories could not be erased. He was relieved though, as even if the bully spoke to someone about it, no one would believe him at all. Finally, when Alfred left the spot and the bullies got up, they were confused as well as terrified to see themselves completely okay. One of them was sure that Alfred was the poster boy, but he had no evidence for it either. In the end, they concluded that it must have been illusion magic from the House of Elites. Furious once again, they decided to make him pay for it. On the other hand, the protagonist realized that with every passing minute, the memories of the body were synchronizing with him. It was then that he was called by someone, and when he turned, he found his filthy teacher asking him if he was still a first-class student. The news was about his transfer to Class 3 starting that day. The direction was to climb up the stairs and go straight to the end of the second floor. Also, before he could leave, the teacher clarified that it was the last time he was going to be lenient with Alfred. Alfred, without showing any interest in the warning, just thanked him and started to leave the place. As soon as he left, the teacher enjoyed the moment of turning a high noble into a sorry state, destined to become a slave. When Alfred reached the end of the corner of the second floor, he found a classroom. As soon as he entered the place, it was already a mess. Within no time, a girl bashed into him and fell on the floor. She, a little concerned about her pain, identified the boy. She was totally confused about her reaction and told him that she was the one who was worried about him all the time, thinking that he might have committed suicide. Out of nowhere, the girl started dragging him along with her, and with a lot of questions in his mind, Alfred decided to ask her about her identity. She took a while and then introduced herself as the class president of the slave class. They soon arrived at the open ground, where some students were engaged in some kind of task. When the protagonist asked about it, he was informed that they were picking pebbles. Before he could even understand it, the girl went on her knees, asking him to join them, as the first-class students were about to start their magic training, and they had to pick the pebbles to protect them from falling on the floor. Suddenly, she realized why he was confused and decided to explain the system. The class system was like a pyramid, with the higher nobles constituting the first class, studious nobles in the second class, and those who fell from that category placed in the third class or the slavery class. She further told him that apart from the division based on grades, they also relied on points, and if he did not manage to get plenty of them by the end of the year, he might end up being expelled from the school. The girl was doing her best to complete her task and tell him how to climb all the way up to the first class. All those ways included serving food to the nobles, carrying the nobles' belongings to their homes, and even the pebble activity played a role in it. The lady was determined to prove her worth to them. She wanted them to realize that even a commoner could become a magician in the Empire, just like Cedric, who had recently passed away. This statement was enough to turn the events upside down. On the other hand, the girl was more worried about the arrival of the nobles, so the protagonist decided to help them with his magic by digging the pebbles in their place. Just then, the nobles from Class 1 arrived, complaining about the stench of the commoners. However, when they noticed Alfred among the commoners, they mocked him for being abandoned by his father and stripped of his noble title. Those nobles called him a pitiful lost cause, and all those statements continuously boiled his blood. The nobles then decided to head to the training session while asking him to observe them. At first, they cast their magic in a fireball using their wands and tried to hit the target with it. All others were also trying their best in the practice. One of them called for water, so the lady from before brought it up for them. However, as they just wanted to bully her, one of them slapped that cute princess to the floor. It was like they were playing with those kids from Class 3 like toys. It was enough for the protagonist, and he was disgusted by their behavior. His character felt like a slave in his own country. Alfred went to help the girl up from the floor, telling her that at that rate, Class 3 would never be able to get some classes and increase their grades to move up to the other classes. However, the lady accepted her fate as a slave, with tears in her eyes which perplexed the protagonist. The entire system gave him chilling vibes, and he realized that the system itself was rotten to the core. Out of nowhere, a noble got hurt on his knees, and he called for the individual in charge of cleaning the spot where he got injured. Alfred did so, but the lady took the blame on herself. The noble was furious and continuously demanded payment equivalent to his blood. However, she boldly, with tears in her eyes, denied his claim of being injured by a pebble. That declaration was enough to strike a delicate nerve in the noble. As expected, he, without understanding the environment, loaded his punch to deliver it to the girl's face. This time, his fist was stopped in midair, and it turned out that our protagonist had realized he was the main character. Not only did he block the punch, but he also pushed the noble back. The noble tried once again, but this time he attacked with a kick. Alfred again protected the lady and took the kick without even flinching. The attack was strong enough to shatter his head, so the lady, concerned, asked if he was okay. Alfred was fine, as he had already set up a barrier. It was then that the noble disclosed that the person promoting that system was the culprit who had harassed him earlier. The protagonist then realized that those who attacked him were them. Nevertheless, the noble started spouting nonsense about something called the Round of 10 Blades. According to his disclosure, the Round Table of the 10 Blades was under the direct control of the emperor. It was considered a bureaucratic organization that controlled the school with the motive of grooming the next generation of the 10 Blades. He wanted to tell Alfred that the top 10 students with the highest grades were going to be appointed as the potential candidates for the next 10 Blades. In the end, what it meant was that while they received training, they would be involved in tasks like managing commoners and resolving disputes among the nobles. The protagonist was intrigued by this explanation, as he was happy to find a way to manage the population at that age. But even more, he was interested in knowing the names of the 10 Blades who had driven him to the corner. He was doing all of this to favor the child who acted as his vessel. Once again, his dream shattered when that kid denied having any knowledge of their identity. Nevertheless, the noble was more concerned about seeing Alfred's face again if the protagonist managed to ace the next day's exam for promotion to the second year. Once again, the noble kid was full of himself, considering Alfred an opponent who had little or no knowledge of magic at all. Each and every noble was giving the protagonist chilling looks to threaten him. However, all the protagonist managed to do was thank them. They were confused by this act, so he clarified that the thanks were for the valuable information they gave him. What he was planning now was to defeat them in the promotion exam and then proceed to achieve his best grades. As soon as he completed his saying, the nobles looked at each other and started laughing heartily. They were not expecting a lowly kid like him to say something like that with such confidence. So, in order to break his spirit even more, they told him that even if he managed to get a promotion, he would never be able to become the top student in the school. Once again, he was unable to understand, so a noble told him about the presence of the class representation competition. It was an exam introduced that year to sort out the top rankers in the school. As he heard of it, he understood it as a standardized exam to assess academic knowledge, but he also knew that they could not conduct a mock battle exam for assessing their capabilities. So that was why they were selecting certain individuals to compete and using ranks to identify the best among them. The more shocking news was that the second and third classes were planning to forfeit. What that bastard wanted to tell our protagonist was that there was no chance for him to participate in the class representation. But when Alfred heard the word forfeit, he left the lady in worry and asked the noble what would happen if he managed to gather 3 members and beat the crap out of his class. No one among us or them had expected such a statement from a third classer. The noble had already had enough of his yapping, but soon a teacher arrived and stopped them from fighting. It was like he had heard all of it, and then he told our protagonist that if the third classer managed to defeat the first class, he promised to acknowledge the third class and not the first. He also promised to remove the slavery system from the school. This was no simple matter, as in the teacher's eyes, even being publicly humiliated was part of being a slave. The scene then shifted back to the classroom, where the lady lost her cool and asked why he had done that back in the playground. Others agreed with her too, as they knew that they would suffer along with him. The protagonist was calm as still water, and then asked them if they didn't get hurt while being treated like crap. Even so, the students of that class were happy to stay within the limits of the lower class, believing it kept them in a good mood. Alfred was too cold to react to this, but he set everything aside to ask if any of them were going to participate in the interclass competition with him. His classmates started making fun of his mind, as they did not want to be suspected of having a defiant attitude like him. All of that made him realize that they were no good, as both their hearts and souls had accepted slavery. Somehow, the lady gathered the courage to tell him that she was going to join him. Her name turned out to be Percy, and her decision was not expected by anyone in the class. They threatened her with the consequences of defying them, but she wasn't concerned in the least, as she knew they were being treated as slaves anyway. With that reminder in her mind, she decided to step up and accept the situation. Alfred noticed all of it and found her character to be different from the others. While the others murmured about stepping away from the war Class 3 was going to initiate against Class 1, they recognized the two of them as a burden to the class. However, they also knew that they needed 3 individuals to participate, and his classmates denied that any third person would agree to the task. Even Alfred knew that finding a third individual was not a piece of cake at that moment, but he suddenly turned to them to tell them that he was not relying on any of them as soon as Percy agreed. After stating his point, he got up, reassuring them that everything was going to be fine, as there was a certain person in that academy whom he knew. The scene then switched to the outskirts of Sword City, to the designated hazard zone known as the Forest of No Return. A boy was facing a deadly monster all by himself. He was proclaiming to be the greatest genius the Magic Institute had ever seen. That kid managed to evade the monster easily. He had skipped several grades in elementary school, and on top of that, managed to graduate from the Magic Institute at the age of 12. All his achievements led him to knock on the doors of the Magic Guild without attending high school. However, when he entered the apex of the magician's realm, a man standing tall called him Cyrus Taylor and told him that his entrance exam started right then. Convinced that he was at the top of the magic world, he had so much confidence inside himself. So on the day of the guild entrance exam, one of the heavenly sages, Cedric, stood in front of him. As soon as it started, Cyrus used the grade 3 magic spell, Stone Missile. He wasn't holding back even a bit, thinking that his opponent was one of the greatest sages. His plan was to attack in the opening that would appear when Cedric nullified his spell. That foolish kid was not there just to pass the test. He was there to be the 12-year-old who defeated the guild master. His only expectation was to become a legend. However, destiny had written something else. All of his planning and expectations were shattered when Cedric mercilessly crushed his attack with his bare hands. Cyrus was completely shocked by this act of brutality. He immediately went back on guard and gained distance from the man. Cedric suddenly concluded the exam and delivered his verdict, denying Cyrus admission to the guild. The reason for his denial was the immaturity he possessed at the age of 12. The little kid, furious, protested and disclosed that it was the first time he had been defeated, and only because he was fighting a heavenly sage. None of that convinced Cedric, who told him to complete his graduation from magic school before entering the guild. In Cyrus's eyes, there was nothing left for him to learn at the institute. His attitude was full of overconfidence, so in order to teach the little brat a lesson, Cedric released his mana in front of him, revealing the amount of mana he had held back in the previous battle. Soon, that mana took the shape of a large football. Cyrus knew that this was some serious mana control. The guild master further disclosed that it takes a great deal of concentration, which is fundamental to mana control. In the end, all he was asking Cyrus to do was control mana at his level to attain body strengthening, so little tricks like his stone missile would be child's play. When Cyrus denied his ability to do that, Cedric told him that it was the basic thing taught to elementary school children. It was more shocking to the prodigy, and he became furious, realizing that Cedric was saying his magic abilities didn't even match the most basic techniques. But soon he realized that whatever Sir Cedric was stating was the complete and only truth. All he was seeing with his eyes was a man with extraordinary magic abilities. Cedric then left the hall, giving Cyrus's magic a complete 0. Since then, Cyrus had been practicing hard. 5 years had already passed, and he had been attending the Magic Institute's high school. During that time, his skills and capabilities were close to those of an instructor, which was why he was studying directly under the headmaster. The monster he was fighting then was a minotaur, with a difficulty level of 8 due to its physical abilities. That 17-year-old kid was fighting the monster using only body-strengthening magic, making that type of opponent a piece of cake. His first punch managed to shatter the monster's shield but wasn't enough to defeat it. He knew that one punch wouldn't do any good, so he delivered a series of serious punches to the monster. He knew he couldn't lose the battle in that situation, and with that thought in mind, he delivered a punch that was strong enough to put a hole in the minotaur. Cyrus was finally happy as he was improving. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the area changed, and within seconds, Cyrus was surrounded by a herd of minotaurs. He was shocked because, according to the reports, there should have been only one. Fear gripped him because his body was already worn out from his excessive reliance on body-strengthening magic. Cyrus knew that his chances of survival were slim, yet he was determined to take at least 3 of them down with him. He didn't flinch a bit and raised his wand, thinking that his magic control wasn't up to that person's level. Just then, before he could even cast his spell, someone appeared out of thin air, taking down a couple of minotaurs with a single strike. Cyrus was perplexed by the sudden appearance, but as you and I might expect, it was Alfred, aka Cedric, who gave Cyrus 65 points. As soon as the protagonist landed on the ground, he called Cyrus by name and told him there was much to discuss. However, he asked him to first clear the mess. 5 years was a long time, but not long enough for Cyrus to forget that refined magic control, which belonged to the great sage Cedric. As the mess cleared, Cyrus went to his knees, and the protagonist decided to tell this story to the prodigy. After a short while, the scene switched back to the school, where Cyrus was present along with Class 3. They were shocked to see a Magic Institute prodigy there. Everyone stopped when Cyrus began to speak of his special position and told them that, as a research student, he had recognized the worth of participating in all the curricular activities offered. The major announcement was that the president had decided Cyrus should represent the class along with 2 other participants. Back in the Forest of Uncertainties, Alfred had introduced himself as the reincarnation of the sorcerer Cedric and asked him to keep it all a secret from everyone else. The day finally arrived for the written examination for this second-year promotion test. The noble was still full of himself and was making fun of Alfred. Others were with him as well, calling Alfred a fool for delusionally thinking about reaching the top with such low grades. While they were enjoying their little happy moments, one of them arrived at the door and, while shattering it, told them that Cyrus had been assigned to the slave class. All of them were in complete shock at that declaration, and when they remembered him being the genius with a special pass, they wondered how it even happened. They knew that if this happened, it would lead to a class versus class showdown, but the other thing that worried them was the shift of the top class to the third class. The Baldi, finally giving it some thought, calmed them down, stating that there wasn't any kind of problem with it. In his mind, he was optimistic, thinking the other 2 were stupid in the team. They were relieved with that clarification. On the other hand, when Alfred was walking down the corridor with Cyrus, every individual was shocked to see such a genius in the bottom class. Pers was worried about Alfred at that moment, but when he asked the reason for it, she informed him about his enemies, whom he was going to face in the mock battles. Another reason to worry was his performance in the mock battle. If he didn't clear that, they wouldn't advance to the final team battle. However, that little thing was of no concern to our hero, as in his eyes, catastrophic failure in a school exam was out of the question. Yet Pers was looking more tense than him, so Alfred was more worried about her. He asked her to do her best in the exam, saying that it was all that mattered. Pers instantly changed her behavior and clarified to them that she wouldn't fall behind in the written exam either. Pers then told them that her real name was Lisa Wilson and asked them to call her by that name as teammates. As the time arrived, the exam was about to begin. It was the written exam, and Lisa was already worried, realizing that 40 minutes had already passed, leaving 60 minutes behind. The difficulty of the test was insane for her, yet she thought of giving her best, realizing she would be left behind. However, when she noticed the protagonist sleeping during the exam, she was shocked. Then she became even more tense, seeing him seemingly giving up after being confused. She was worried, but when Cyrus looked at the paper, he realized that the questions were tough for a first-year student. Even so, it was hard for that kid to believe that Alfred would finish the task in just 10 minutes. It seemed to everyone that he was just sleeping, but on the other hand, he was seizing every moment of focus he could find. It was a technique called the Tandem Light method. Determined to follow in his footsteps, Cyrus also completed the exam in a blink and started rehearsing the technique. Lisa was again left in awe by his actions. As the exams concluded, time lapsed to that very night in the teacher's lounge. The teachers were shocked to see a bottom-tier student scoring full marks, even higher than Cyrus' percentage. It was even more shocking for them because the exam was designed to prevent anyone from scoring full marks, as it contained the latest magical equations that the late Cedric had deciphered. The teachers were determined not to believe that a student solved those questions and concluded that the question papers were leaked. When they presented the issue to the president, they called it a grave situation and demanded action against the student who scored full marks. It was a tough situation, so the president called for an investigation before the results were announced the day after next. As the teachers were not holding back and continuously demanded action, the president stood up in anger, calling it hasty to jump directly to conclusions. But when he gave it a thought, considering Cyrus's petition to transfer to the third class because of Alfred, he realized that there was something intriguing about him. The scenes then turned to the next day at the personal mock exam venue. In the arena, the protagonist was facing his cussed sensei and the Baldi all alone. They were continuously mocking him and declaring that they would deliver a well-deserved punishment to a cheater. That was how the personal mock battle started. The teacher then called him the worst person alive on Earth, so Alfred realized it was related to his written score. However, it was then that the teacher turned cold and told him he had scored a perfect 100 on his test. The Baldi was completely shocked and started losing control, but the teacher stopped him for a moment to add a twist to the story. Without a second thought, He accused Alfred of being the culprit who stole the question paper. He accused him of doing so, thinking that Alfred was trying to earn the respect of his father. The teacher was also losing control after thinking about Alfred committing such a lowly act, calling him even worse than livestock. However, he calmed himself down somehow and told Michael that it was an exceptional case. As for that examination, he was allowing him to go overboard without any hesitation. He called the mock battle a punishment for stealing the exam question paper in a sacred school. Michael smirked, dismissing the concern as trivial, but was relieved that since he had gotten a stamped approval, he was determined to curse Alfred's existence himself. That was enough babbling, so the protagonist asked him to come at him for a little payback. Both of them started laughing as soon as they heard this, as in the eyes of the teacher, there was a chance of finding a silver lining, but forgiveness was not an option at all. Finally, the time arrived when there would be no more chit-chat, as it was time for them to get on with the battle of misery. Michael was determined to crush him utterly and completely, whereas the protagonist was relieved that there was nothing to worry about. Michael rushed at him for the first attack, but Alfred did not flinch even a bit, as he knew that one hand was all he needed. Just then, he suddenly realized that his body was not moving, and so that Baldy was successful in getting a hold on Alfred. The man was in the mood for wrestling, so he caught the protagonist by his back and tried to give him a curved slam. He was successful in delivering the blow and was relieved, thinking the battle had already ended. However, things were not like before, so the protagonist stood up without even a scratch. The Baldy tried again to punch him down to the floor. Once again, Alfred's body was not listening to him at all, and once again, Michael was able to successfully deliver that hard punch. That punch made him remember the misery of the child's soul inside that body. His sufferings were far more than what he was enduring at that moment. The Baldy kept attacking the protagonist, and the protagonist kept thinking of the fear etched deep within his very flesh. It was not long before he calmed down the young one's soul and promised him to take his revenge and settle the score. As soon as he made that promise, his body started moving on his command, and he was able to stop the Baldy's attack. His response was more furious than imagined, as the punch he delivered was enough to shatter a human skull. That single punch sent that Baldy filth flying through the sky. In the end, all he became again was a poster boy engraved on the broken wall. Soon that kid lost consciousness, and Alfred mocked him for his state right then. Michael was unable to understand the situation, unable to believe his inability to move and the agony his body was in. Unexpectedly, Alfred approached him, and Michael began begging for mercy due to his complete defenselessness. Alfred then glanced at the teacher and told the Baldy that he was waiting for the final whistle. On the other hand, the teacher was shivering in pure fear, and the protagonist was planning to deliver the final blow. But when Alfred raised that filth for the attack, Michael, in tears, pleaded for mercy. However, as he deserved none, Alfred delivered the final blow. It was extremely painful, enough to shatter Michael's ribs. The moment Alfred delivered the punch, he pinpointed the attack to the mystical circuit forged within the spine. His sole intention was to steal the magic from the sorcerer for eternity, a skill that even the king's elite mages struggled to master. Alfred knew that the boy came from a prestigious line of battle mages and was determined to teach him a hard lesson by snatching his magic from him. The protagonist did this because he learned from his vessel's memory of the Baldy making fun of the boy due to magic. There was nothing wrong with it, as we all know that meritocracy can be a ruthless beast, so he deserved that. The scene then switched to the next day, where everyone was looking at the scoreboard displaying everyone's marks. The nobles couldn't believe their eyes when they saw that Alfred had scored a perfect 98 points. Not long after, one of the nobles informed them that Michael was soon transported to the capital's medical facility after the battle. Things were getting worse and worse for them to believe. While they continued in continuous discussion and babbling, all of it was being ignored by Alfred from the outside. He knew they probably couldn't grasp a thing, and there was no need for them to either. He felt guilty, so he clarified to himself that a sage like him wouldn't get involved in such miserable battles, but since he had promised something to his vessel, he was intent on making them pay for what they had done. There were a total of 5 of them who were under the radar as his targets. He knew that he had to find the next contender soon. A while later, he interacted with Lisa, and she was quite surprised to hear about the boy ending up in the hospital after the previous day's mock battle. Alfred called it the law of karma, but it wasn't enough to calm her down. She immediately screamed out her frustration about ending up with Alfred alone in the shooting arena. She needed confirmation on taking the target test, but before the protagonist could say anything, someone called him from behind. They were the nobles from Class 1 who had come to witness his pathetic display firsthand. According to his reports, The exam supervisor had refused to deliver any details on the match. So once again, that noble accused the protagonist of cheating by drugging Michael, as in his eyes, a nobody like him couldn't take on a noble that easily. Finally, the real reason for their immediate call to the shooting arena was disclosed. It was a stage set by Class 1 to make a fool of them in public. The noble was enjoying the moment of his life, passing by the protagonist and making fun of him. Alfred realized that there was suspicion of cheating in the last exam, but Lisa was worried about the target practice. The protagonist wasn't concerned about it because he knew that all the test required was precision and power. With that relief, he asked her about her and Cyrus's mock battle. It was evident from Cyrus's reputation that he claimed victory even before the battle began. Not only that, but the truth was that she too emerged victorious. In the middle of the arena, she disclosed to him that she might not be able to meet expectations, but Alfred, striking a hero pose, assured her that there was no need to worry, as he and Cyrus would be enough. Lisa was too curious to know as much as she could about the protagonist because she thought there was something extraordinary at play with him. All she wanted was to see him. Alfred called the target practice a hassle, as in his eyes, he didn't see the point in shattering your targets with neither defense nor any means to retaliate. Out of nowhere, Cyrus arrived, agreeing with his statement and telling him that he was too caught in the ceasefire. In reality, what he meant to say was that the principal had asked him to set an example before they could take aim. Cyrus understood that amidst the sea of onlookers, a genius was being asked to demonstrate his powers, so he concluded that it must be a plot to showcase a spectacle. It was an insult to a prodigy like him to be asked to shatter an impenetrable wall. Soon, the exam was about to begin at that very moment. The nobles were there just to witness Alfred's misery, but it was going to be something more worthy. The battle was between a genius and the most below-average guy. Finally, the genius took the first step of targeting the wall and used a massive firewall, pinpointing the target. Everyone was surprised to witness the true power of Cyrus. They realized there was no chance of winning against that. All of them were confused to see a kid like him wielding the 7th tier of magic. Even Alfred was stunned to see the magic, as it was the level reserved for the elite faculty or academy executives. However, with that attack, even a special target with magic resistance had completely vanished. The second chance to show power was for the protagonist, but he was still unsure if he should hit it or not. On the other hand, nobles were enjoying the pitifulness of Alfred. Against Cyrus, if he threw a tiny fireball, it would be a joke. The protagonist was hearing all that and was creating a different level of aura around him. He knew in his inner heart that what he was going to make them see was what would turn things upside down. It was as if he planned it. As soon as he cast his magic, the principal was completely shocked to see the incredible amount of magic power. What he cast was magic used to make a meteor fall. However, the noble was happy to know that Alfred's magic had failed miserably. He was about to laugh, but his happiness was very short-lived. Out of nowhere from the blue sky, a meteor was seen falling. With point-blank precision, that meteor was targeted onto the mark. The headmaster was still in shock thinking about that, and the noble filth was calling it truly unbelievable. That meteor not only broke the target, but also successfully destroyed the ground. Lisa had her suspicions, but she had never imagined it to be so extreme. As a student, Cyrus praised his master's techniques. He felt the magical power inside the meteor fall. It was not enough, so Alfred told him that if it were the true nature of the meteor, then the academy itself would turn to dust. Lisa was shivering to hear their unbelievable talk, and the headmaster thought about the student being able to use the 8th tier of magic. He felt that it was just 20% of the actual power, but still, it was rivaling the peak of the headmaster. On the other hand, nobles who were there to make fun of him were unable to take a fall into their own pit. While one was calling it a trick, another realized that it must not be a trick. He felt that the kid was really that powerful. That guy was in so much fear that he wanted to escape to the hospital. However, the most filthy one was determined to tear off the face of the disguised Alfred. The scene then switched to the Imperial Capital School of Magic, thanks to the Healing Magic Rehabilitation Center. As someone opened their eyes, it was found to be the Baldy Filth, Mikal, who was thinking about his predicament. As soon as he realized he was in the hospital, all his suffering from the last mock battle replayed in front of his eyes. It was taking time for him to accept that he had lost the match as a member of the prestigious magic family. All he was thinking of was making Alfred pay for his actions, and he was ready even if it meant putting some pressure on the academy through his old man. However, when he tried to get up from the bed, he had a bad sensation about his body. A lady arrived there, calling him young master, and she was accompanied by a doctor. Michael recognized the girl as Amelia, and then told her that he wanted his body to heal fast in order to smash Alfred into the ground. However, the doctor denied this, stating that it was not possible. His denial meant nothing to the Baldi, so he was determined to leave from there. To make him understand even more, the doctor told him to look at his own feet, which were weaker than even a thin piece of wood. All that was giving him the wildest flashbacks from the battle. The doctor further told him that it would take 6 months for him to live a normal life. However, before he could even finish, the Baldi, being stubborn, continuously asked them to let him go. This time, Amelia came forward to stop him, which raised his temperature to the point where he threatened them, saying he would kill them if they got in his way. Both the doctor and Amelia did not flinch even a bit. He took that personally and tried to attack them with a second-level magic spell, Ice Needle. It was all in vain, as nothing happened, and no magic was cast at that moment. Before he could even understand, the doctor told him that devastating damage had been discovered to the magical circuitry in his spine. Even the doctor was in disbelief and was eager to know about the skill level of the sorcerer. In the end, he clarified that from then on, Michael would not be able to wield any magic ever again. When he finished, Amelia further added that, as a family devoted to the craft of magic, a decision had been announced by the Lord that young Master Michael would be stripped of his status and of being the eldest son. He had already been removed from the academy, so, as per the circumstances, Michael would face the brunt of public scrutiny. The next declaration was enough to shatter the hope of the Baldi. From then on, he would never be allowed to escape from that mansion. Everything was too fast for Michael to understand, so all he could do was ask the doctor to fix his issues. He was still thinking of being the strongest, so he ran at the doctor with the intention of punching him. But as expected, he faltered in the middle due to the pain in his back. The doctor immediately asked Amelia to bring some anesthesia, and Michael was in tears while going through the suffering he was then. However, when she ran out of the room to get the medicine, she saw some students from Class 1 eavesdropping on their conversation. That noble was completely unable to process what was happening. All he could think about was the protagonist's face and shiver in fear of the devil's revenge. He was on the floor, and that noble's fear was confirmed by Charles. He too added that it was turning into a real mess. The noble then understood that the protagonist was using the mock battles and was planning to send them directly to the hospital. On the other hand, another was confused about Alfred's sudden increase in strength. Charles then told them that Alfred's family was from a legendary lineage of sorcerers, so the only clarification was about his sudden awakening of his genetics. While the others were not able to process the awakening, Charles gave them a background about the current deputy leader hailing from the lineage said to be intertwined with the dragon god and humans. As per the whispers, that dragon god might have suddenly awakened inside him. Other nobles were not ready to believe that something like that could happen to a nobody like him. But anyway, they knew that they would need to devise a strategy to defeat a powerhouse like Alfred. They did not want to end up like Michael, so what they needed to do was stop that man from stepping into the mock battle. As soon as he told them, the filthiest of them all informed them about his father being the den of the serpents, so he could get it done from a high-ranking official from the emperor's own intelligence agency. As Charles confirmed, that noble flexed that his father had connections with the Assassin Guild. The scene then switched to the Assassination Guild, where a man was telling the noble that an 8th-tier sorcerer could not be a student. So if that was the case, then he knew that the protagonist was able to reach the level of a court sorcerer. That noble man was too furious and was uttering ugly nonsense about the Assassination Guild to convince him. As that guild man took it personally, he again repeated that it was not an easy task. The shocking incident continued, but it did not take long for the guild men to change their attitude. He asked the noble to get into the negotiations while pointing to something that could be used to defeat that man. It was a potion that hinders the use of magic, but its only drawback was the loss of magical ability. That assassin wanted the young master to make that man drink it. The kid got excited immediately to know about his inability to use magic. His imagination was completed, which included the option to eliminate him too. The assassin was about to ask him about the price for it, but before he could even ask, that rich kid spread some gold coins in front of him. It was the money which was left over from the treasure he had sold off from their mansion's vault 2 years ago. That valuable had been stolen by himself, and when the mansion went into a ruckus, he, being the eldest son, got out of it without any hindrances. In the end, one servant was executed for a crime, and he enjoyed the act of the head cutter. After knowing about the personality that the kid possessed, he dropped the price of that potion by 50%. That offer was a kind of forward investment, as he wanted to make him a top-tier client for them once he became the head of the family. He finally sealed the deal, and then thought of beating that scoundrel to death with that potion. As the scene switched, Alfred was seen enjoying the meal, and Lisa was shocked to see the sheer mountain of plates he had already devoured. It was like he was having the most exquisite dining experience. After completing the feast of meals, he was ready for indulgence in the post-coffee. However, before he could even move a bit, the noble came to him asking for some time of his. Alfred did not like his interference, and so he told him that he brought him a cup of tea to sweeten his mind. In order to make it all feel easy, he told him that he was there to apologize. Alfred did not feel anything awkward in it, and asked him about the condition of Mikal. He, while sipping the tea, told him about the loss of the word shame in his dictionary. That noble was too happy to see that man falling into his pit, and then finally disclosed that the true reason to be there was because he found out who the candidates for the 10 Swords of the Round Table were. He knew that the candidates would fall under the jurisdiction of the National Intelligence Agency. The protagonist was eager to know the names of those individuals, but the noble denied disclosing such information in such an insensitive place. He then asked that man to head out to the perfect spot for that discussion. As soon as the scenery changed, that noble was guarded by a bunch of magicians, and the protagonist was not able to understand. He was confused if he had said something harsh about the mock exam. The noble then clarified that his sin was thinking about revenge against the high-born noble. He further mocked Alfred that he was not a noble, as he was tossed to be a commoner by his own parents. Alfred went on his guard to tell him about his misery of being stuck in that status. On the other hand, the noble was giggling to see him holding his bravado act, but he was still sure that he would not be able to match the strength of those nobles. The reason he was saying that was because he was a grand noble, and in his eyes, being a noble meant that they could bend the world at their will. The protagonist was worried about those nobodies who were there to stop him on cash and connections. The noble was sure of it too, but he then told him that the coffee he just drank was tainted with something inside of it. As expected of the man of honor, Alfred giggled at the noble's condition and told him that he was not going to repeat the same mistake twice. He was able to neutralize that poison in a blink and then recognized those men there from the Assassin Guild. After knowing about that presence, the protagonist knew that only one of the top tiers could send them to assassinate him. The noble was left in awe once again to know that he knew it was a trap, and yet walked into it right ahead. He replied positively to it, stating the presence of a theme behind it. The noble was still confused, so Alfred clarified that the theme of combat, to wipe out the ruffians, was perfect for a post-meal workout. Just then, within a blink of an eye, one of the assassins jumped to wipe out Alfred. However, as expected, the attack was blocked easily by him, and then he used his power to break that man's bones into pieces. The protagonist was too cold for them right there. It did not take him too long to wipe out more than half of the assassins. He was continuously engaged in battle and was eliminating them with ease. The assassins were trying out every technique to get to his back, but were unsuccessful every time. With his sheer power, he was taking down every one of them. After everyone was finished, the noble was not able to believe that a mere mortal who could not harness magic could even win against an assassin guild member. In clarification, he told him that he had perfected the martial arts of the East and that the skill he used was the realm of the divine. The protagonist then noticed that the noble was the only one standing, so he delivered a punch to him too. Not long after, he started delivering a series of punches while the noble kept asking for forgiveness. As earlier, he was in no mood to spare his foe, so he continued his task of making him suffer. Everything was going smoothly as he delivered his fist attacks. The noble was not able to keep his eyes open at that moment. In the end, when he was about to fall onto the ground, the protagonist caught him and used his advanced healing magic to heal his body. Once again, that act left the noble in confusion, wondering why he was doing so. He was not able to understand why he cut him some slack when he was about to lose consciousness. It was not like the man had some misery against him. The first round was about his revenge for all the bullying he endured at the academy. So basically, it was not the end, as the second round was about to start. The second round was about to end, and he had successfully busted that man onto the ground. However, the man was still not satisfied after that vicious attack, so he used the 10th tier magic of teleportation. He was then teleported to somewhere in the mountains, and as soon as he landed in the place, he found that it had been ages since he visited that hideout. With the attack he had just faced, he came to know that it was from the assassination guild known as the Black Serpent's Venom. He found the circumstantial evidence to be flawless and thanked his files from his past life for the information. He knew that if that was going to be the man he imagined, then he would act again swiftly. The protagonist realized that the man was someone worthy of trust. The scenes then shifted to a few days later, where that filthy noble had arrived at the assassination guild to ask the owner to take down the protagonist. Being even more furious, he asked the guild member to make sure to give him as much suffering as he could. The man was about to tell him something, but just then he heard a knocking on the door. A man, half-beaten, arrived there, asking his master to come out, as they had already been surrounded by the palace knights. That assassin was in absolute fear upon hearing this. The messenger was about to add something to his talk, but was immediately sent flying away. What only the two of them could hear was the voice of a man introducing himself as Theodore, who had the honor of serving as the captain of the royal palace guard. That assassin realized his position and quickly changed the subject, introducing himself as a merchant guild dealing in groceries. The captain was not a fool, so he understood that the place was surely not involved in selling wheat and fruits. In order to get a better understanding, he announced that he would search the premises right then. The guild member was in fear and felt that the information had been leaked, but he asked him not to panic, as there was no crime in that room. He knew that all the drugs were underground, so as long as they could keep the underground a secret, it would be fine for him. However, destiny had something else planned, so the first thing the captain asked to investigate was the hidden room below in the basement. That guy knew everything and was there with precise knowledge. The kid, on the other hand, was still confused about what was happening. The assassin then told him that everything was over, as he was going to meet his end right then. The same was true for the noble too. He went into fear and then asked for some time to tell them that he was the eldest from the Shumlet family. The captain found that name something that carried weight. The noble felt that the captain was scared of it, so he asked them to pretend like nothing had ever happened. As expected, suddenly the captain changed his demeanor and told him that he could do so if he wanted to get his father arrested. He wanted the kid not to get his status above his head, and then introduced himself as the man who could read the atmosphere in the court. His mindset was considering a wrongdoing, and in his entire career of investigation, he had not written even a single lie. Additionally, he informed him that his father was aware of his doings, so he would be considered a criminal for sure. What he wanted to say was that the act was a classic case of cutting off the lizard's tail. In order to resolve the matter more closely, he told him that it was the fastest route to close the family issue. It was like all the court was a den of vipers, so when it came to families, and if their taste was bad, they had to sever the ties from them. In the end, he concluded that assassination requests were a grave crime, so there were no VIP suites in prison. It was too cold coming from a captain's mouth, and the noble was still shivering at the thought of his connection being cut off. He announced that there was no way for it, as it was absolutely impossible. The assassin asked him to calm down to avoid making things worse in court, so in the end, he could not do anything at all. All he could manage was to get his hands cuffed and walk along with the other culprits. As they left, the captain was confused about the identity of the man who kept the documents on his desk. He remembered from the elegance with which the documents were kept that it was from the same person who used to be his friend from before. The reality was that he was not able to believe if that was really true. The scenes then switched to inside the academy room, where the noble's friends were shocked to know that he was caught by the police knights. The news was confirmed by Charles, along with his expulsion from the Magic Academy. The bad news included his disarmament from the Shumlet family. Both of them then felt that only two of them were left. Michael had already been shot dead, and Chad had already been arrested. What they understood because of this was that they had been cornered in a dire situation by Alfred. They knew that both of them had no path forward in life, so there was no room left for doubt that Alfred's power was the real deal. Charles knew that he had no mercy against them to take revenge, so he asked the others to keep their defenses ready. They knew some individuals who were the biggest delinquents, so they were thinking of taking help from them. Just then, one of them passed by, and the noble approached him as the person he needed. He ran to him to talk about a cocky slave and asked him to take him down. That delinquent, too, knew that he was talking about Alfred, so he declined in an instant. He had heard rumors that Alfred had even taken down some professional assassins, so he and his team had already decided to stay clear of that person. That delinquent instantly ran away in the blink of an eye. It was not long before the other two nobles started arguing with each other, while Charles kept his mind calm. He had always thought of both of them as fools from the start, but had never imagined it would end like this. He did not care about the status in the school, and since his two comrades were just helpless in that moment, he himself wanted to find a way. He gave it a deep thought, and then wondered if the effect that Alfred went through was because of his growing up in an environment where merely uttering words set the motion to fulfill desires. Out of nowhere, one of the nobles remembered that if they lost the mock battle, they had to swap classes with a slave. Charles had already had enough of the chit-chat, so he changed their direction to head to the cafeteria. Both of them found it good to go, as it was the best place to strategize against dealing with Alfred. Charles was really confused to think of the opponent as a monster, so he was too worried about the two men he had to deal with. The scene then switched to the cafeteria dining hall, where the third class was engaged in the preparation of food for the first class. Just then, Alfred found a napkin on the table and asked Lisa to look after folding it in a beautiful manner. She was confused about how he could do that. It was not only for one, but he did it for each and every table in an instant. Lisa found it truly elegant. Suddenly, someone came from behind, calling them his friends from the third class. As Alfred turned, he found the headmaster standing behind him. The protagonist was happy that he had finally arrived and felt that it was the best time for them to make the move. He did not hesitate a bit and asked the headmaster to consider his suggestion before discussion. This discussion was not disclosed and was kept a secret. Before agreeing, he asked for some time, as it was not a decision to be made lightly. The headmaster left, and Alfred thought that the preparation was complete for them. At the Magic Academy, as the regular staff meeting was going on, the headmaster was telling them that, as in the past exam, Alfred had aced the exam with scores that had never been seen before in the academy. So in order to know its true worth, he had sent a messenger to the royal capital for a magic test assessment to know how extraordinary he really is. After that disclosure, he asked Clive if he had promised to switch the positions of his class in case the third class emerged victorious. Clive cleaned his glasses and clarified that it was just a matter of words exchanged, and he never meant those. However, the headmaster was considering the switchover anyhow. It was sudden, and the headmaster further added that the 10 swords of the Round Table were solely determined on the basis of merit, and chains of status do not play any role in it. Additionally, he knew that there had been whispers questioning the fairness of the class management policies. The headmaster then told him about the secret conversation between him and Alfred, where Alfred told him that Clive was the one who had taken nobility as a standard, and since it was not elegant in a school, he wanted to write the expulsion papers of that man by himself at that very moment. Clive was shocked to know that the man named him directly. The headmaster continued that if the outcome of the battle led to the shuffling of the classes, then, as being the head of the grades, that destiny would fall upon him, so he should be the one to take responsibility in that situation. Clive was still in pain thinking that since Alfred had shattered all his previous records like a comet, he knew that some normal students from Class 1 could not beat him. He knew too that losing would mean being kicked out, so it was already a disaster. He was more furious thinking that he was from a family of elites, and since at that age he had climbed all the way to the head of his grades, he was supposed to be the top candidate for the next chancellor too. He was still not able to believe how on earth it came to this. As Clive left the room, he encountered Charles in between, where he told him that there was something that he had to discuss. He got straight to the point and told him that both of them were in a tight place. Clive also had never expected that Alfred would go to that level. Charles just told him they had been granted autonomy on campus as the candidates for the Round Table 10 Swords. Clive was shocked to know that and then told him not to discuss something like that since it was classified information. Charles knew it better, so he told him that they were bound to bring their own destruction if that continued. His proposal was a straightforward method. They needed to change the intent to war. He was planning to intervene in the Academy's self-governing system, and he knew that it was totally impossible without being into the 10 Blades. What he truly planned was to use every means available to launch an assault and obliterate Alfred and his crew. The scene then switched to the student dormitory made up of commoners at the Magic Academy. It was Lisa who was having a dream from the past, where one day her sister was whisked away to a grand noble's mansion. She had heard that it all started when the Duke was walking incognito through the streets, but even being a child, she had a vague sense of it. Lisa thought and was happy to know that her sister was going to be a duke's wife. Her sister was not kind of happy there, however, being a child, she was not able to understand any of it at all. All she did was wish her goodbye. However, as expected, it ended in a foul manner. Her sister was used as a tool of satisfaction, and the Duke's ugliness was revealed. Her sister had to face the tempestuous jealousy of the Duke's legal wife and the cruel torment of revenge. Everything turned out worse, and Lisa remained blissfully ignorant and untouched by the truth. Lisa kept waiting for her sister's first letter, and months later, the first and final notice arrived. Lisa was happy to have the letter. However, the contents were depicting a different story. It had a few gold coins that were sent along with a strife, and it was disclosed there that her sister was not to be a bride but to be a maid. She believed that they were trying to brush everything aside with a measly condolence payment. All she could remember then was the misery and sufferings of her elder sister. Nothing had changed since then too, as when she is in the Magic Academy, focusing on her studies, it was still the same. Nobles were nobles and slaves were slaves, and she was still being taken away. As part of her everyday schedule, she wished goodbye to her sister's image and went off to the academy. In her first interaction, she met Alfred. He wished her good morning, and they both walked together. That girl was determined to never think of herself as someone taken away. The day finally approached for the final mock test battle, and she, with the intention to be stronger, was determined to give her all. On the other hand, there was an announcement already placed on the notice board, and Charles was scheming to get something done to which even Alfred would not be able to do anything. Lisa was yet determined to do her best in the next day's 3-on-3 battle. Alfred felt her stubbornness, so he calmed her down, stating that as long as he himself and Cyrus were there, everything would be fine. Lisa knew from the start that Alfred had not taken her into account in the victory parade, so she was there just to fill the gaps. She understood better than anyone about facing two geniuses against a commoner like her. With knowledge of their weaknesses, they both entered the class and found Cyrus standing there. He was there with bad news at the heart of the moment, and it was disclosed that the rules had already been changed for the match. Now they had to face battles within each block, and the finals would be set against the average win rate. They realized that it was the plot of the nobles, as they did not want Class 3 directly head-on. Lisa was the one standing against the sudden change, so Cyrus told her that it must be the play of the 10 Swords candidates. Cyrus knew that if the root of the plot was being plotted by the 10 Swords candidates, then the rules could easily be rewritten. Alfred realized that the reference of the average win rate would be a bit messy. Cyrus further added that the lowest percentage for advancing there was 80%, but since they had only 2 members capable of winning the fight, they knew that they would end with 1 loss in every match. Lisa's suffering went on and on. Feeling that it was her fault for the other 2 not advancing, she was continuously cursing herself in anger, but Cyrus immediately asked her to come with him as he had something to show her. They took her to a laboratory and told her that magic was something which was intertwined with the soul, so it was known that anyone who had visited both life and death had a superior amount of magical energy. Cyrus presented to her a potion named Shinpins, which was a deadly poison. That technique was something that could enhance magical power only once in a lifetime because of its success rate. Everyone always tried to get to resurrect from death with about 5 years of training, as the risk associated with dying was just too great. Cyrus was trying his best to encourage her to have a sip of it, so he guaranteed her that she would not struggle against her peers with that. Suddenly, he changed his voice and told her that it was just an introduction, after which he asked her to head back to the classroom. Lisa was not a fool, so she understood and declared that the only reason he brought her there was to make her drink that. Cyrus was not someone to ask her to go to her death, but Lisa knew the truth. If she continued like that, it would be impossible for her to survive. She knew that the academy was already overflowing with absurdity, and if she did not get stronger, she would keep losing the future. So since she really found someone who defied that absurdity, she was determined to walk the path alongside them. With all that understanding, she knew exactly what she had to do. Immediately, she drank the potion, leaving Alfred and the others in shock. She was doing all that to stand tall and be their comrade. As expected, the girl lost her consciousness right then and was saved by Alfred before she fell. Cyrus, with his act, called him a little soft-hearted and then asked Alfred to turn the fatality rate of the potion from 50% to 0%. The protagonist denied it, stating that he had his limits too. He knew that if they wanted to maintain the effects of the medicine, they needed to invest a long period in healthcare as well. So in the end, he called it utterly ridiculous and reduced the fatality rate. Alfred was moved by Lisa's determination, so when she opened her eyes, he told her that the preparations were complete, and he found his comrades too elegant, knowing that victory was waiting for them at the end. The big day had finally arrived for the representative showdown. In the beginning, those nobles were lined up with some lowly kids. They continued their brawl and kept attacking them to make them suffer. As soon as the last one won the match, the other noble was happy that, with that, all 3 were undefeated there. However, Charles knew it from the start, as he was the one who set the matches. Both of them were continuously making fun of those kids, and Charles was happy to have beside him 2 delinquents who were strong enough. He then informed his comrades about the beginning of Alfred's team matches. Preparation had already been done, and the first battle was a face-off between an ordinary kid and the prodigy entering Class 3 as a sudden. The opponent's eyes were deadly, but soon enough he went on his knees and surrendered in an instant, leaving others in shock. Cyrus laughed it off, calling it a wise decision, and then walked out, thanking him for avoiding having to dirty his hands. Those 2 noble delinquents called it absolute nonsense, and then went into a useless brawl. Charles was calm as always and told them that the next match was Alfred's. This time, Alfred was facing off against a lady who immediately came closer to him and in a lovely soothing voice gave up the fight. When asked for the reason, she told him that she knew she could not win that match anyhow. Alfred was not someone to walk off, so he asked her to give it a shot before heading down herself. It motivated her, and she agreed to the match. In the beginning, Alfred called for the 7th tier magic, leaving that girl in absolute misery. She was thinking that he would go easy on her, but Alfred did not stop there and cast the magic to pinpoint directly at the lady herself. She was engulfed in that magic, looking like she was being torn to shreds. Even the delinquents were shocked at his actions, but then suddenly noticed something in the thin air. That ball contained the referee and the lady in the air. After the magic on the ground ended, the bubble broke and both of them fell from a certain height. When the referee was on the ground, he told them the rule of being eliminated once someone is off the arena. The referee noticed it and then declared Alfred as victorious. As the match ended, Cyrus was still in the learning process from his master. He understood that there was a difference in their abilities, but he felt that accepting the surrender before the fight was like a betrayal to himself. He knew that his master was saving the reputation of the students as warriors, so in that manner, Alfred was able to emerge victorious and save the reputation as a warrior at the same time. The two delinquents, on the other hand, were thinking of their condition in case they faced off against Alfred without any barrier saving them. Charles asked them to calm down, as he knew that his team was bound to fall off. He was so sure because he knew that there was someone on that team who was bound to lose that match. In his eyes, the sole weakness in the Alfred team was Lisa Wilson. However, the man standing in front of her was in the blazing flame, Lydia. Still, Charles was too confused to think of Alfred and Cyrus winning in that method. The noble delinquents were also sure of Lydia's victory, as the candidate from the slate class did not even stand a chance there. When Lisa was standing there, she remembered Alfred's sayings about the test being for advancement. He was sure that the opponent would surely see her as inferior, so he was sure that the enemy would demonstrate overwhelming superiority. It was all happening like he predicted, but he knew that Lisa's specialty magic must be in the realm of defense. Lisa was giving her best to use her magic to block the attack. At the very moment, she thought of screaming out loudly to tell them all about the usage of the 5th tier magic called Spirit Guardian Barrier. Alfred was sure that there was no one in the entire academy, as a student, who could pierce her defense magic. It happened as expected, and she nullified the attack with her defense magic, leaving Lydia in absolute shock. She did not wait even a bit after nullifying and then ran straight to the back of Lydia for a striking fast counterattack. In the same motion, she used the 5th tier magic of Ice Fang Strike. That attack was enough to send Lydia flying away into the sky. In the end, he was outside the arena and was unconscious. With the predictions of Alfred and her magic, she had finally gotten the first win for herself. The scene then shifted to Alfred's family home, where Alfred's burial father, Olgren Burial, was seen sitting in a cabin. The butler knocked on the door and came in to report something. That was about the young master. However, Olgren was not interested in any knowledge about him, since he had already disowned him as his son. The butler again tried to tell him, pointing out the promotion exams. Olgren was too cold and thought that his garbage son had somehow lost and was playing dead in the academy. In his eyes, there was no room for failures, so he warned the butler not to discuss it under any circumstances. That poor guy went into shock, and after denying something like that, told him that his kid had aced the academic test with flying colors. Olgren asked for more details, so the butler explained that Alfred was easily able to wield the 8th tier magic, and that even in mock test exams, he had been overwhelmingly powerful. Olgren found it too hard to believe something like that, and the butler then threw the final arrow. As per the headmaster, reports stated that Alfred might have inherited the legendary cross-generational traits. As Olgren knew that his family had gained the status of nobles due to the evolution of beings from the union of humans and demons long ago, he immediately became more interested in the schedule of the advancement exams. The butler just told him about the final tournament being held the next week, so Olgren instantly asked him to cancel all his plans, as he was going to be there to see his son winning the finals. He was too happy to know that his son had finally been able to be called a worthy son. As the scene switched back to the preliminary exams, the nobles were terrified to know that Alfred's team was going to advance to the finals. They had nothing to think about what to do. One way was to back off from the battle. However, Charles denied it, as if it happened, his wrath would continue, and he would be targeted anyway. One of them was too worried about that happening to him, but he knew that they were not the ones creating chaos. He had a flashback of all that started from a letter lying on the table of Alfred, depicting that he had been abandoned by his family halfway, signed by a member depicting himself as one of the 10 swords. The next day, the same continued, and Alfred was left in awe in front of everyone. In the noble delinquent's eyes, they should not be the ones to be scared of revenge. Charles was worried about the fate awaiting the man behind the 10 blades. So, in response, he got to know that the person had to pay with their life for the kind of act he had done. Charles knew it too, so he was determined to bind his true identity until then by any means. The scene then shifted to the 3rd classroom after the exam, where someone came to Alfred with bold eyes. He was the same person who had denied forming any kind of team to battle against Class 1. At that time, he was there to apologize to him, as he was the one pushing them back when they were going to defy the top class. He continued that he found his stunning comeback truly incredible. The other 2 of the team were strong too. However, in his eyes, Alfred was someone who cast the hope for them from the bottom. Yet he considered that he could not reach his level no matter how much he tried. Finally, he thanked Alfred for his hope and asked him to give his best in the finals too. As soon as he was about to leave, Alfred accepted the gratitude but asked him if he thought that reaching his level was impossible. Again, that kid did not find anything wrong with it, as Alfred had the awakening and Cyrus was a prodigy. Alfred then told him in a bold voice about Lisa drinking the secret potion for that mock battle and showing resolve to defy fate by risking half of her life. It was shocking enough, but Alfred further added that Cyrus truly was a genius. But what made him even more of a genius was his sheer determination. He knew that he was going to win the battle by the next week and liberate the class, granting all of them the freedom they wanted. Everyone knows that talent may be unfair, but in the world of theirs, equality was just leftist talk. However, one thing was there for everyone, which was time, and it was enough to be an equalizer for all. So Alfred asked him to choose for himself what he wanted to choose, either to seize the opportunity or lose the sight of hope. He wanted that man to believe in himself and go on with the flow. The scene switched to the notice board, where a new notice was already there along with the matchups for the finals. That notice clarified that it could even be changed by the 10 swords candidates. As known, behind the headmaster it was Alfred who could do so. When other students saw that, they were terrified to think about the conditions Class 1 was going to end in. The final would constitute every student as a spectator. Everywhere had the talks about the finals, and Charles was listening to it all. He realized that the headmaster was also under their control. What it really meant was that the final was not a mock battle, but it was a direct invitation from Alfred for a revenge match. Even after knowing all that, he knew that he had no place to escape from. When the scene switched to Class 1, the delinquents were cornered and were continuously being asked if they could win the matches and save the class from worsening positions. In response to their continuous questions, one of the delinquents replied negatively, while giving the excuse of the opponent being a monster who could wield 8th-tier magic. One of the girls then praised them, saying that even fools knew that they could not win the match by playing fair, asking if they had any cheap tricks up their sleeve. Delinquents knew that it could not be managed that way, but she continued to order them to win, as a grand noble would. They had already had enough, so they told them to fight on their own at their place. All that discussion was switching to a useless brawl. At one corner of the seat, someone did not know about the takeover. She was then told that if those guys lost the match, they would have to swap their places with Class 3. The only meaning that stood for was that they had to become slaves, for no noble was left from the exchange. But suddenly, the daughter of Habsburg's aura changed. She did not want to change to something like that, so she was repeating it again and again. It was then disclosed that a class which had been all bound up once had already been divided into parts fighting to avoid becoming slaves. Charles, on the other hand, was already on the floor after thinking of the circumstances he had to face off for then. A boy came there, asking Charles why he was in that condition. Charles called him the information broker and asked about his presence there. That scoopy-looking kid tossed some papers in front of him, depicting them as the reason for the sudden changes in Alfred's characteristics. He had found something intriguing in the National Library lending history. A book had been lent to Alfred on a date right before he started attending the academy. The books included recipes for physical enhancement and methods to temporarily amplify magical powers. Yet again, there was a huge risk in using any of that. Charles, trying to understand and grasp the situation, then realized that the grimoire of demon summoning was once on the edge of forbidden texts. Charles needed further information on his changing, so the informant told him that demon summoning offers 2 ways for forging a powerful contract. The first one was to summon a demon into the mortal realm, for which the price was 1 soul. The second method was by offering flesh to a demon and becoming a vessel for its descent into the world. Alfred might have used the second method for his purpose. Charles then suddenly changed his voice to tell him soothingly that there were ways to defeat demons so they could really win. On the other side of the wall was Clive, who was worried about thinking himself being expelled by the academy if Alfred won the final match. He was thinking that he was going to teach second-rate magic at the countryside. It was a great suffering for him, and then, out of the sudden, the headmaster arrived, leaving Clive in wonder of his presence there. The headmaster was there to tell him that since the first class contained students from grand nobility, if there was a swap of classes, the relatives and their guardians were not going to be happy just with his head on the platter. He started shivering, and the headmaster asked him to get prepared for a line of apologies. The headmaster knew that the nobles would try their best to pull strings from various places, so the result would be simple. He would be banned from the other magic academies of neighboring countries, leaving him to be a magician utterly impossible. Clive realized that not only his teaching but everything was at stake. At the end, the headmaster asked him to prepare himself to face what was heading for him in the near future. Clive was lost for words in that very moment, as he realized that his state right then was near to a death sentence. When the headmaster left, Clive had lost all of his hopes. Charles then came to him, asking him to lend him some favor. Clive asked him if he was talking about Alfred, as he was not going to get himself involved in something like that. Charles knew it too, so Clive asked him to understand and move on from there, leaving him on his own conditions. The 10th Sword member was not ready to lose hope and was relying on the finals, so he asked Clive to lend his help to enter the Forbidden Library. He wanted to visit and read something in the library to which ordinary students did not have access. Clive was stunned and worried about what he was planning, as a student handling the forbidden texts could face serious criminal charges. Both of them knew that they were on the edge, so it was not time for any kind of nonsense talk. Charles reminded him that he and Clive would both be doomed if it was not corrected. After a while, Charles collected everyone into a room and then told them that the secret behind Alfred's strength had been revealed. It was like that the boy was demon-possessed. That statement was enough to change the environment of the class. Soon, everyone started agreeing with his findings. Someone knew that to summon a demon, a price is required to be paid, so he was shivering to even think about what he had paid for that demon. Others were worried about the identity of the person who pushed him to that corner. They were eager to know how they were going to approach that event. Charles, being calm, told them that it was nothing of that caliber to call someone an adult. However, he then introduced them to his sensei to be a part of their plan. As that filth entered, he brought a book of invitation into the Death Realm, which was a forbidden tome on demon summoning left by a sorcerer from 30 years ago. As soon as everyone heard of it, they were surprised to think about what they were going to do. Charles was planning to get a tooth for a tooth, so it was like if they summoned a demon, they should do the same thing too. With the level of magic that Alfred had been using, Charles decided to use the 9th circle and summon a mid-tier demon for then. Everyone there was too pumped up to know about summoning a mid-tier demon to defeat Alfred. However, the one who was not liking it was the Grand Noble. She immediately asked him if summoning a mid-tier demon would require a ritual spell, so it really meant that a sacrifice was needed. She was interested in knowing if he meant that it would be any of them. No one wanted to be a sacrifice for the cause of turning into slavery. Charles told them that they truly had to help with the ritual, but then told them not to worry because none of them were on Alfred's revenge list. He thanked the gathering and then asked the delinquents to stay behind and let others move out. As everyone left, the atmosphere changed suddenly, so one of them asked Charles if he wanted any of them to be the sacrifice. He replied positively to it, but then disclosed not to lose a life for it and spread the burden between them. Charles meant that both of them would sacrifice their one arm for the cause. However, before he could even complete, both of them lost their cause and asked him to hand over Michael, as he could not even use magic and was useless. The other one agreed to it too, and out of the sudden, Michael entered the room, leaving every other one in total shock. He was there after sneaking out of the mansion, and the reason he was there was to offer his both legs to the demon. Both of them could not believe it. He continued that since his life was almost over, his legs were of no good to him. Even then, his maid used to take care of his basic needs, so he really just did not want his legs at all. Not only that, he laughed at Chad also for his inability to move due to being in a cell. In the cell, his life was not more than something like a play toy. Commoners used to play with him every second day there. All that motivation was for them to ask for their hands as sacrifices and rest assured while living in society. Danis then asked him why he was so stuck on Alfred. Michael told them that it was because he was the one reason their life had turned to hell. His voice was getting tense every second, so he continued that since he was going to lose the ability to walk again, Both of them had to choose to either live life with one hand or live their life like Chad or himself from then on. Both of them understood the assignment, and Charles asked them to keep that moment engraved in their memories, where they were going to write the script of Alfred's slaughter. The event was finally about to begin, and Michael was ready to give everything he had for that cause. He was determined to pay for each and every pain he suffered from him. All of them wanted intervention from Chad too in it, so Charles clarified that he had played his role too after revealing a place where he had kept all his money. Charles was going to use that money to ask the criminal guild to kidnap Lisa Wilson. They were doing something like that to break Alfred's heart into shreds. Charles was enjoying the moment from a distance, as everything was going as he planned. He made the teacher commit a crime to get his hands on forbidden texts and lured in those 3 delinquents for the sacrifice needed to summon the demon. He was happy after being completely unscathed, even after being the mastermind of it all. He was controlling all the puppets in his palms. How could someone be this stupid, thinking of catching the king? On the other hand, Alfred was calmly reading the book while Cyrus was bowing in front of him for an apology. In reality, Lisa had already been taken away by the criminal guild, even after Cyrus, as the guard, was the reason behind that apology. Alfred then gave thought to whose mind could outsmart Cyrus's mind, as their methods did not lack any artistry. In his eyes, those filth had lost their complete shame after abducting a girl for their favor. The protagonist immediately asked Cyrus to head on, while Cyrus, being worried, asked if it would be fine to act as per the letter received. We all know that Alfred was not going to play as per the script, but the thing to worry about was that he had no intention of resolving that in an elegant manner too. He meant that if any of them laid a finger on Lisa, he would break each and every one of them. There was a different story running in the staff room, where the headmaster revealed to the others, after reminding them of the sample send of Alfred to the Magic Academy for power assessment. Clyde was more worried about it being disastrous, so the headmaster revealed that the details were still unclear. However, as per the test result, one of the 3 sages, the illustrious Saint Flame Isabella, was going to be in attendance. The staff was not able to believe something like that, and wondered what had drawn her attention to a school match. The headmaster could not do anything other than wait for the reports from the capital. However, the thing to worry about for them then was managing Alfred. The scenes then changed to the place where the devil was said to be worshipped. It was a region soaked in the blood of many, with black manna lingering in abundance. No one could teleport to that location all of a sudden. However, our protagonist was some other kind of species than human in the story. On interrogation, he was there after the news of buying chickens, pigs, marijuana, and heroin. Also, they could not feel any kind of criminal guild members' movement, so they understood that the exchange had already been completed. Alfred had gathered the total news, including that people were summoning some demons at that moment too. Cyrus was still worried about how he managed to get so much information in such a short time, so Alfred disclosed that the reason was due to his dabbling with a spy in the past. Cyrus realized that with the supplies they had, they could manage to summon a mid-tier demon, so it would not be an issue. The experienced person then told Cyrus that relying on assumptions could be a fatal mistake and reminded him of the time he was stuck against the Minotaur after not properly assessing the request information given by the guild. In the end, he moved into the mansion, telling him that even a lion gives its all while hunting a mouse. Inside that mansion, all that he disclosed was kept there as a sacrifice. Students were involved in forming that ritual, and Lisa was laid aside completely unconscious. The delinquents found that place boring, not having the skill required to do the task. The conversation continued, and the other kid denied the fact of heading home without doing anything. It was then that he asked the other to have a look at his own feet while pointing to the lady Lisa. He was asking to go ahead and play with her to his heart's content. They wanted to be the first in the play, without allowing others to dig into the feast. Their perverseness was increasing every minute. The more they were looking at her, the more excited they became for the play. Soon, they removed her clothes and then decided to go for the feast. Destiny once again had something else planned for them. Alfred came there, punched that pervert against the wall, and broke every bone in his body. Alfred apologized to Lisa for keeping her in such a surrounding with such a foul smell. He decided to close the matter up quickly. As soon as Mikhail heard it, he came out of the room in his wheelchair, telling him that he would be the one going to meet his end there. Alfred, on the other hand, was in a foul mood, so he asked them to bring whatever they had at their disposal at once. All 3 of them reconfirmed if he asked all of them to come at him at once. Cyrus was thinking about Mikhail's presence there, and Mikhail told him to get back to his senses. He should not be asking that after seeing the ritual they were performing at that moment. The ritual started in an instant, and both delinquents began losing their one arm, while cursing Alfred to get to hell. That sacrifice was enough to get the ritual going, but Alfred knew that it was not enough, and would need even more than that. He was right, as the very second the demon casting was getting done, Michael also started losing both his legs while cursing Alfred. The protagonist was heading to the battle, however, Cyrus requested him to leave that part of the battle to him. It was not something that he could handle, and Cyrus knew it too, as he was barely able to handle the 7th tier magic, so he was putting himself to the test to get a good result for it. Alfred really wanted to know what he was aiming for, so Cyrus told him, while being an embarrassment, that he simply wanted to remain in his presence for then. He remembered all the magic that the guild master showed him, so he was truly convinced that there was no one other than him to whom he could dedicate his life. Alfred realized that he wanted to be an acquaintance to him, while denying that he had never kept one in his whole lifetime. With that declaration, he allowed Cyrus to get ahead in battle, but warned him that he should not help even in the case of absolute death. In the end, he allowed Cyrus to get in and show what he got. As the battle began, Cyrus was able to sense the absurd level of magic power and its sinister aura too. He could tell while standing there that even a second of relaxation would be fatal. He started to get onto it with the 6th tier magic of explosive fireball barrage. That attack was pinpointed to the devil's legs, and when Michael noticed it, he found that Cyrus was hiding in the smokescreen. But it was not an issue for him, as the devil did not rely solely on sight. On the other hand, Cyrus had used the screen to get to the back of the devil, but before he could even attack, the devil noticed his presence and then attacked that man from point-blank range. The delinquents were happy for it to be the end. However, the happiness had no life, since it was not really Cyrus but the 6th tier magic illusionary phantom. Both the demon and the delinquents were left in shock by that. Behind it, the real man was still unnoticed at the back of the demon, relying on his extra mana being used for the purpose of that illusionary magic. It was then, when he was about to attack the demon with his strengthening magic, that something unexpected happened in the moment. The devil was able to sense that attack too. This time, Cyrus was the one with no defense on his back, and the devil took that moment to crush our side actor back into the ground. Michael enjoyed the moment of the outrageous battle, and then laughed at Cyrus for thinking that he could take on a mid-tier demon with 6th tier magic. His happiness was once again shattered when the smoke cleared, and Cyrus was seen blocking that punch, thinking about the sweat and blood he had given to training. None of them could believe what was happening in that moment. However, it was not the end, as Cyrus, being determined, completed the attack he had prepared since the start of the battle. It was a perfect punch delivered to the face of a mid-tier demon. Cyrus's physical abilities core was an 80, which was the passing mark. That was something which was even praised by the great sage himself. The punch delivered to the demon's face had changed his appearance too. Being furious, the demon instantly attacked the man of the hour. This time, he did not have the courage to move out, so the great sage came by himself to save his disciple there. He laid down Cyrus at a distance and asked about his help there, where he denied at first. He was determined not to ask for any kind of help until he passed the exam. However, Alfred told him that he was his disciple, so he could really manage to do something for him. Alfred then laid him aside Lisa and asked him to just wait for it to close. His movement was so fast that Michael was not even able to notice it. He was continuously mocking the man, as if he could stop the inevitable from happening. Telling even more, he introduced the demon as Ardos, who once devoured the souls of 200 soldiers in no long time before. Michael was truly not in his senses, and was continuously asking him to look at Cyrus's condition. His words were hurting the protagonist like needles. Someone calling his disciple a useless fellow was not something he could praise, because that man had attacked the devil even after knowing he could not win that match at all. While he was in his thoughts, Michael was babbling utter garbage out of his mouth continuously, advising the great sage to go on his knees and apologize to him. However, even after an apology, he was not going to go off the mark and had determined his punishment to be death. As wolves were always in herds, someone came from behind, naming himself a teacher who should have the pleasure of saying that thing. He was not alone, but was with the entire class one. Clive was there to see Alfred dying in that grave situation. Everyone there was giving a sinister laugh and changing the environment to terror. It was nothing different from back then when Alfred was bullied in front of everyone, and everyone enjoyed it. In the sage's eyes, it was utterly repulsive. The demon then spoke and called him a small and diminutive wizard of mankind. He was asking the protagonist to deliver all his worth of power in a single attack. He wanted to see his abilities. At first, Alfred was shocked to see him talking, and then asked the reason behind his generosity. The reason behind that generosity was the person's presence and confidence. He once again asked that human to deliver his punch with all his might. The protagonist too valued his demands and then struck him with an attack rising from his single finger. That attack was enough to pierce the demon's belly and give a spat of his creamy red water on the face of the devil's bald head. Not only him, but everyone from Class 1 and the teacher was at a loss for words. The demon was on the floor in a single hit, and Michael was thinking about the probability of that happening. He screamed out after witnessing something like a mid-level demon being killed with a single hit. He was continuously screaming out of disbelief while being on the floor with no legs, with no chance of that happening. Charles, on the other hand, was thinking of mobilizing the court guards, but then decided to use a mid-level demon. He was too angry to think if Alfred's power was even surpassing a knight's. Just then, Alfred told something to Michael while telling him a period of 6 months and 23 days, asking if he knew what that number meant. Michael was completely unable to understand it. It was the time that the true owner of that body suffered the sufferings of their bullying. He introduced himself to be the executioner of his revenge, and then decided that Michael too shall experience the same amount of time that the boy suffered. It was then when he used the magic of the 9th tier to summon the gate of the other world, after which he told him that beyond that gate he had harbored the creatures of the nightmare. Michael identified it as the plant monster that devours humans to feed on. Actually, the pet that the protagonist kept was of the supreme variety named the Shadow Flora. For the punishment after capturing a human, the Shadow Flora continuously shows them their worst nightmares. In reality, the line between the soul becoming a husk is 6 months, and so if they do not descend, they would live the rest of their lives with deep scars on their hearts. Before he could send Michael alone, he turned to the others and decided to send them to the same fate. Every one of them called it absolutely insane, as it was like living in hell. Alfred gave them a death look, asking if they were not the ones first to do so. Delinquents realized that it was like a total hell and was completely nonsense. On the other hand, Charles gave a grin and then clapped for Alfred, praising him for what he did. As Michael was asking him to find another way to save them, he told about its existence, but then asked for everyone's cooperation for it. Everyone agreed to it, as they were ready to do whatever they needed to escape from there. Charles again asked them if they could do anything to revert that, even if it took putting their lives on the line. This statement sent all of them into absolute fear. Before anyone could answer, Michael replied negatively to it, and then asked everyone to take Alfred with them to hell. He wanted blood for his revenge. Charles was grinning because he knew that the contract was sealed, so what he wanted was that the summoning magic circle was brilliantly completed, so even if they could provide sacrifices on a grander scale, they could wield an ultimate magic. That freak was truly planning to summon a higher-level demon with the preparations. Suddenly, Michael started screaming for his life as he could experience a pain that no one ever had. Not only him, but some of the other students also started losing their heads. Clive was in shock to see that he had sacrificed all his classmates there. He did so because every single one of them there was a noble, so in case even any one of them was left behind, he could face execution. In front of Alfred's eyes, Michael died, but in reality, Alfred had never planned for something like that. Charles then told him that he felt the same thing for their classmates, as he had also never intended on taking other lives. That statement made the protagonist realize that he was the one who was the mastermind behind all that scene from the beginning. Charles praised him for his abilities to have the sharpness to identify the man of honor there. When Alfred asked why he did his persecution, he stated the reason that no matter how much he studied, Alfred always got a higher position because of his noble lineage. On the other hand, Alfred had no memory of him treating him badly, and he truly believed that they were the best friends. For the first time, Alfred was losing his mind to tell him that it was not friendship but something forced by his parents upon him. His family wanted him to be his loyal sidekick, so in the end, he abandoned his family for the sake of revenge. However, he realized that it was the moment of his, so he summoned the demon known as the Blade of the Demon King, Abaddon. That time it was no joke, as the monster that came out was something that could not be taken as a light cause. Charles had lost his mind and was only thinking of his revenge, which he had thought of all those years. Finally, the blade of one of the demon lords, the god-slain demon dragon, had arrived. Clive was someone who was not able to believe that something like that was happening there. He was calling it truly impossible. Alfred did not even flinch a bit, and then recognized that demon as the Nebula minion, who was one of the 5 gods' death blades. That information was something that even someone like Charles could not understand. The demon then spoke up all of a sudden and told him that only the 5 arch-gods and friends recognized that name. Charles was at a loss for words. Alfred just made fun of that dragon, telling him that he must be someone of less importance then. The dragon started sweating and then finally recognized Alfred as the illustrious Archmage Cedric. All of a sudden, both of them started talking casually, and the monster started asking him to visit his place for some time. Charles was still quiet, as he was not able to believe that he was in front of a man that even the dragon demon considers as a master. Or in simpler words, he was in front of the supreme sage of the heavens. He was not able to understand a single thing, and then confirmed it from Alfred himself about his true identity. Alfred finally introduced himself as Cedric, the supreme sage, and told him that he was simply reincarnated in that body. Charles was not able to believe such a level of reincarnation, but when he gave it a thought of that man being the only sage in human history to have reached that level, all the events till then started making perfect sense. He instantly went on his knees and then realized that even the demon was on the side of the man. It was then when he told him that if he wanted to win against him, he should summon the demon lord himself. Charles called it utterly nonsense, as a demon lord would not heed a mere human's call. Alfred did not find anything foul in it, but yet asked him to summon someone stronger than that, as Abaddon had been speaking of terms with their first for 20 years then. Charles then finally realized and laughed out in despair, thinking that it was seriously the great sage Cedric of the heavens. The sage was not someone who could spare someone who had cornered young Alfred, kidnapped Lisa, and slaughtered 30 of their classmates. Justice was decided to be served at any moment, so in order to do so, he used his magic and dropped a knife in front of him, while Charles continued his wait for the justice to be served. The only thing was he was not able to understand the meaning of it, so he disclosed that it was the mercy he could offer and then asked him to decide if he would use it or not. As the second punishment for him, after taking the average life of his classmates to be 50 years, and he had taken a life equivalent to 1600 years, was the suffering of the Shadow Flora to the relentless nightmare for the next 5 years. Charles truly realized that there was no sense of mercy in the dictionary of Cedric. The explanation was then clear for the mercy, and then again asked him to end his life with honor, or he would take the second punishment of enduring the suffering from the Shadow Flora. He was giving that filth the chance to choose his own fate. While he was shivering in pain, he decided to use the knife. He looked at his face in the blade, and then started begging for forgiveness from Cedric at that very moment. He was giving the excuse of Alfred's memory of them being friends. He was sure that Alfred would not do something that terrible to his best friend and would stand by his side. Cedric called it utter nonsense for him to ask for forgiveness without showing any fight. He was cursing then, swords for their selections. Not long after, the Shadow Flora threw its tentacles, and he kept asking for it to wait somehow. While he was being dragged, Cedric decided to speak the same words he had said at the time when Alfred needed him the most. Alfred wished him goodbye, asking to never cross paths again there. In the end, he was totally engulfed by the flora, and it was merciless. The same night, the headmaster visited the place along with the other staff members and saw the clothes of 30 students all covered in blood. Everything was totally lined up, other than the demon corpse. The headmaster could not believe his eyes at what had happened. They could not understand why the students were summoning the demon at that point, and called it utterly foolishness. One of the staff members found Clive slumped in a corner of the room and started questioning if he was really there. So many questions were there to be answered, and the topmost was about the person who arranged the students' uniforms like that. Just then, Clive told them that the students were summoning demons from a forbidden text, but was too worried to think that every single one of them was dead in that very moment. Clive was at a loss for words, and the other teachers were saying that it was a case of responsibility as his class contained absolute nobility. They were continuously asking for an answer and further asked if he meant to say that he was the one who did so. He told them that Alfred was the one who defeated the mid-tier demon, and it was like a piece of cake for him. However, since he had lost consciousness, he could not recall what really happened after that. The other staff told him that they had rushed there after the report from the third class. He made the assumption that perhaps Charles too had lost consciousness like him and must have been devoured by the dragon demon then. However, the reason for worry was why he was alive there. He was the one who brought out the book. Since everyone was dead, he would be the one to take the responsibility. However, he tried to calm himself down and then thought of using a cheap trick to get out of that situation. However, things were not going to be like that again, as the headmaster was already on his case. He announced that since the situation had already slipped beyond his control, he would be handed over to the knights of the police. The most probable verdict for it must be his head being beheaded. When he heard that, he completely lost his senses, and while laughing at himself, he snatched his own neck with his own hand. The scene then switched to the same day at the palace, where someone was talking about the taste of Isabella when she asked about the flesh of a child of average age of 12. Isabella found nothing wrong in it, as she was the one getting shelter to them. It was the same man who tricked our Cedric Aemon, who told her that even commoners could see that she always looked for fresh young flesh as the sacrifice. Isabella then reminded him of the next day visit to the Magic Academy, calling it a total hassle. It was then that he reminded her that the Supreme Sage was researching the laws of reincarnation, so it was highly probable that it was the reason he consumed the poison so easily that time. They knew that if that was the case and the Supreme Sage had reincarnated himself, then there must be a reason for him to die at that very moment, or the second reason could be that he had some insurance in Isabella's understanding. Reincarnation meant to be reborn as a baby, but Aemon knew it was better to be cautious than sorry, so they needed to confirm that young man to prevent the worst-case scenario. Aemon knew that if he made a comeback, then they needed to clear the sprout even before it formed into a small plant. She felt that he was being overly cautious for then, but then asked him to give her some room for her hobbies to be fulfilled. Aemon, being a gentleman, immediately moved out of the room, asking her to enjoy the moment she loved. Isabella immediately called for the new girl there to be the first target. The act of inhumanity exceeded when she dropped the wine on her feet and asked her to taste it. That little poor kid crawled to her legs, and then started licking the wine off her socks. She was enjoying it at its peak, and was happy too that Aemon left, as she could do whatever she wanted. After that task, she asked the girl to come with her and then took her to her room. The room was covered with red marks everywhere, and that beast was asking the little kid to share the room with her. The day finally arrived for the final, where Oligran was getting ready for the look. He was happy even after the demon incident turning the advancement upside down. It was good that his son won by default, but he was still considering a victory as a victory. He had also heard of Isabella arriving at the awarding ceremony too. It was truly delightful for him to get an eye on Isabella at the time of the Magic Academy. He then asked the butler if he was feeling nostalgic about that situation, and the butler replied positively, as he had witnessed the frail state of Alfred and seen him recovering from there. Oligran was not leaving a chance to praise his child for the first time in that long time. He was planning to make him the head of the family, the supreme masterpiece of their lineage. The butler could not handle it anymore, so while pardoning, he asked if Alfred had not already been disowned, or if Oligran had really considered Alfred's feelings. It was an eye-opener for that man, but he was so offended that he called the butler a commoner and called the question disrespectful. The butler calmed himself down, and that man further mocked him, calling him a fool for not understanding how nobility truly worked. In his eyes, it was not something happening for the first time, as it was like rising from the muck of the earth back to the heavens. So in the end, he concluded that they could not call for any complaints in that condition. The butler knew from the start that he was going to do so. On the other hand, that man was planning to extend his connections to Isabella, so he called for a healer there. When she arrived, he asked her to ask the head maid to prepare 5 bars of gold as a gift. The butler was too shocked to hear something like that, as the gold bars were something saved to save the farmers from famine. It was an urgent matter, however, it was nothing like that in Oligran's eyes. What was wanted was to earn then was the trust or connection. He was going to get a proper introduction there, so in his eyes, a little gift was not going to hurt anyone. As the scene switched back to the school, the headmaster was telling Cedric that he had been reassigned from the school. He found it good that, with so many deaths of the nobility, being expelled from the academy was quite a fortunate outcome. Cedric apologized for it, considering himself the culprit. However, the headmaster knew that it was his own fault that it had ended there. He knew that he should not have accepted the slay class thing anyhow. The headmaster deserved that outcome, as he was the only one who took the responsibility for its deployment. He further continued to tell Cedric that, the moment he saw his strength, he went into a profound sense of awe. It was then that he became sure that Cedric would change the workings of the academy in the future for sure. As expected, Cedric had really accomplished the task at a speed that far exceeded his expectations. In the end, he concluded with a statement of being proud of that man from the bottom of his heart. It was then that Alfred decided to help that old man in his task. He knew that the headmaster's specialty was magical toxicology. Not only that, but he also knew that the most renowned paper of his was the possibility of poison neutralization through barrier magic. The headmaster was shocked at how a student of his level could understand something like that. Cedric did not tell him anything else, but informed him that there was a man named Thrhodor, the captain of the police knights, and he was in search of an exceptional toxicologist. Everything was running through the head of the headmaster, but Cedric went off, telling him to provide him as the referral for the post. The scene then turned to the auditorium ceremony venue, where everyone was clapping. The center of attraction was the 3 members from Class 3. Not only did they win the match, but they also managed to abolish slavery. It was clear that they were on a whole different level from the start, and all of them had climbed the stairs in the process. In the middle of all of them, his father called for Alfred. He was proud of him for making the entire hall celebrate for him. Once again, he asserted his belief to raise the name of the burial family and showcase the brilliance of their bloodline to the world. Alfred didn't speak a word, so he asked why he was so silent there. In his regard, his son should bow in front of his parents to accept the praise received from them. Alfred then turned to the butler and asked him a question. It was about the identity of the man standing beside him. Olegrin was at a loss of words with that question, as Alfred could remember a person like him telling the boy that he had been disowned. He had a memory of that man telling the protagonist that his existence was completely erased from the family. Also, it was an absolute command, not done with any intention to be waved off. Alfred ignored his old hag and then left the place. Olegrin was in despair, wondering if he was really ignoring him, and was stunned to see that boy brushing his father off so easily. On the other hand, when Alfred saw Isabella sitting on the throne, he had never imagined meeting her like that. All three of them received the certificate of achievement. The most happy of them was Lisa Wilson. The headmaster then asked everyone to give a round of applause to Alfred and asked the wise saint, Isabella of the three saints, to deliver a congratulatory speech. But what she was most interested in was Alfred. She wanted to know the real reason for his sudden rise to supreme power. She was getting closer and closer, continuously staring to find out the reason. She was cursing that young man in front of everyone with the look of a witch on her face. Alfred felt it the same as always, as he was the one who taught her to get drilled into the opponent's capabilities first. In reality, he was using the magic concealment technique, which made that witch think he was such a weak man that she was not even interested in barging in for something. However, before she could leave, she loved his looks and then asked if he would like to join the soiree she was hosting. She felt that she should ask the man who was the head of the family about borrowing his son for one night. Olegrin found it a golden moment and was getting it already cooked. He had heard that Lady Isabella's soirees were quite steamy affairs, so he was thinking that if Alfred was able to make love that night, the standing of the burial family would dramatically increase. Once again, destiny had written something else, so Alfred instantly denied the invitation. That denial left his father at a loss for words. He was continuously cursing his son for brushing off his orders like nothing. The more troubling thing was that he was being ignored by his own son. It was something that no father could take on. Also, when Isabella asked the reason for the denial, Alfred gave the excuse of a lack of experience with women. The man mocked that witch right in front of her face off, and she felt it too. In the end, she declared that she did not need him at that time. Alfred felt that it was like an exchange she had foreseen. But at that rate, he was sure that his role as a different one would vanish. Soon, Isabella asked for her leave from there, and while the headmaster kept telling her about the preparation of the grand banquet for her, she left after making fun of their food, as it was all that was left for them. When everything calmed down for a bit, Alfred told Cyrus that he had always searched for a chance to connect with them, but it was so sudden to happen. He felt that there was no need to save the boy's soul, and it was time to make a move. Cyrus was eager to know when he was going to launch an attack on the three wise ones. Cedric told him that it was not the right time then, as he was just stronger for about a tenth of what he used to be at his peak. Cyrus was shocked to know that what he did until then was just 1/10. He felt that they could defeat the three sages at that very moment, so Cedric again told him that if it were Isabella, he could do it right then, but he knew that the next battle against the remaining others would be razor edge, so he was waiting to reclaim his prime strength before the attack. In the end, he told his subordinate to take care of the absence paper to be submitted to the campus for heading to the north, including Lisa. He agreed to it, however, and asked about the indulgence of Lisa in it. The reason for her indulgence was the notion that if she drank, and if he were not there, then her life would surely be at risk in just 2 weeks. In reality, even if they dodged a 50% chance of instant death, she had paid a huge price for her newfound power. Just then, Lisa too arrived there, asking both of them to just hit the buffet as it was too good, and was waiting for them at that moment. Both of them paled down to think that she had no idea of what she was going through. Cedric realized that it was the right time that she should know everything, and then he told the complete story to her. She was shocked to know that Alfred did something like that, as he should not be able to do so. That confusion was because she spoke in between, so he continued the story that, in actuality, Lord Alfred's identity is that of the supreme sage Cedric. That news was something that could not be gulped so easily. So, as expected, she started screaming that there was no chance of that happening. Cyrus knew that it was a kind of shock for her, But in reality, it was not just a shock, but a 440-volt current for her. Even the great sage, Cedric, asked her to calm down, as she was not going to survive if she continued to react in that manner. Cyrus then asked him about the news of him leaving the academy, so he told him that he was off to visit an old acquaintance, as he had to first settle things with Isabel and reclaim his peak power as soon as possible. He knew that there still was some time before a sacrifice was going to be handed over to the demon. Even Cyrus was impressed to see that he could win against Isabel and yet was trying to be fully prepared for any scenarios. Cedric replied positively to it, stating that winning overwhelmingly was the only thing that mattered to him. Soon, all three of them were at the carriage area, where one of the riders told him that due to dangerous monsters lurking, they would only be able to ride along the caravan like Remora. Alfred agreed to it, and they were then seated inside the caravan. Finally, they hit the road. Lisa was enjoying the view outside the carriage, and Cedric informed them that they were about to enter the realm of the Dragonkin. It was the frigid northern frontiers of Valnorlis. Lisa was worried, thinking if that was really safe, as it had been attacked so many times in the near past. It was then that Cyrus told her that ever since the dragon was defeated by Lord Cedric, it had been calm since then. Lisa, on the other hand, started thinking that she had been traveling with some serious person right then, and it was giving her the feeling of being on an adventure. She was determined to prove to everyone that even commoners were able to become imperial sorcerers, just like Cedric did. Her eyes were bursting with dreams of achieving the highest in the world. Cyrus continued that the scenes had changed in that area, as the humans had now started attacking the dragon tribes. On further clarification, it was disclosed that the Dragonkin, once exalted, were then not able to transform their precious dragon stones, which were taken away as the armed humans were seizing the dragon stones and turning them into slaves for themselves. In Alfred's view, since the Dragonkin is a fierce and formidable race of warriors, there should not be any reason for conflict since the Mikaldara had been vanquished. The real reason it was going through turned out to be that Isabel was behind all that they were going through. The utter display of cruelty both of them found dreadful, and as always, the protagonist did not find it anyhow elegant for someone to wear them down for their own twisted amusement. Just then, the carriage stopped, leaving the passengers to fall. It looked like something had happened, so when Cyrus came out of the carriage, he saw a man asking the amateurs to stay back. On inquiry, it was disclosed that a horde of monsters had attacked them. That man was from the mercenary squad, there to help the caravan men. He was full of himself, claiming to help the students from the academy. The horde was a pack of orcs. Lisa knew that a member from the Magic Guild could handle it, but a student from the Magic Academy could not. But when she gave it more deep thought, she realized she was just being a fool even after having the complete knowledge.